Okay, I think we're going. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another vlog. A couple of warnings. One, this will be probably pretty long. Number two, kind of controversial. With that said, this will probably, I'm going to promise myself, will be my last philosophical, controversial, and political video here on the channel. Might make a mention of it every so often in a stream, but in the past here, probably a couple of years, I've had dedicated videos and vlogs talking about this stuff. One or two I've taken down because I got really worried, but I'm tired of getting worried. I'm tired of feeling like I have to be silenced, like I'm not gonna be listened to. So with that said, I'm gonna do this here and now, and it may ramble, but I've got to get this out there, and I've got to. This is something I've been wanting to do for a while, and I'm going to cover a lot of ground, but I'm going to try to keep it simple and understandable. But I still have Twitter. I've got a thread going on Twitter containing some of this stuff, and I've got a playlist here on the channel from videos around YouTube that kind of broaden certain understandings. It's called Bigger Theories and Truths, or Bigger Truths and Theories. I forget the name of it. Anyway, I'm adding to it every so often. It's here on the channel. But the basis of this video is seeds. Coming up as a kid, as I did every so often in Christian churches, Baptist, non-denominational, Pentecostal, whatever it may be, uh, there was usually talk about seeds, about planting seeds in somebody. Um, and this is really more of like, a comparison of putting good in somebody's life, having them pay it forward, or having them spread a spiritual word, preaching about the Bible, preaching about the good news of God and all that. And it's a decent thing when you're a kid. I mean, it kind of gives you hope. But the problem is that when you realize it, when you get down to that seed and you look at the root with a critical eye, with a critical thinking, and you see the night and day in it. Because, and I'll just put a note here, depending on the church or the teaching or whatnot, there's always hell. There's always a dark place you're going to go if you don't live that lifestyle. And for all intents and purposes, it's candy coated. You're basically told you live this way or you'll burn for eternity. You'll be tortured. Um, what really hit home with me is when you realize if you live your life in fear, you're basically humbled, and not in a good way. The way I see it, and the way some people see it, is that, for example, God, the Christian God, is a parent. He's supposed to look over us all, protection, help us when, give us strength and be there. But in biblical teachings, there's two things that kind of contradict that. And here's the thing. In the US justice system, most of the time, if a parent let's just say an abusive parent, very hardcore abusive parent, threatens their child and says, "If you don't do as I say, I'm going to lock you in your room. I'm going to come up and I'm going to eventually beat you and burn you for the rest of your life." It's where, you know, how how is how is that not different from telling a kid at a young age that unless they do good in their life, unless they speak the truth, unless they do this and that, and you meet this list of requirements to get into the pearly gates, you're going straight down to hell, or you're going to be left behind during the rapture. And then you'll have to suffer through locusts and fires and this great beast rising up in a great war. It's almost enough as a kid if you're of a certain mindset, to worry, and it scares the shit out of you. I can't speak for other people, but I do remember in Sunday school every so often being scared, and it's really kind of the reason I didn't want to go to church a whole lot. And I'm not saying that my Sunday school teachers were like, really dark and like do this, you're gonna suffer. No, it's the under message. It's the teachings themselves that you got to really look at and be like, what the hell is happening here? No pun intended. As a survivor of trauma, as a survivor of childhood abuse, who shall not be named, but I will hear, my grandmother, head of a church respected in the community, put into my life one of the darkest spots I ever lived through, if not the so far darkest spot. And there are some that would argue that my stray from Christianity is because of what I lived through with her and because she's a Christian. And the reason she did what she did was because of Christian beliefs, because of her upbringing, or whatever people want to say. The truth of the matter is, yes, I am a survivor. Yes, I had that trauma in my life. And in some ways, it's weird because I really do kind of want to thank that experience, not the person. Don't get that mixed. The experience. Because in the long run, um, it made me a lot stronger. And it helped me to realize that while I did, for a good while in my life, play a survivor role, because I had been at it throughout my late childhood, through my teens, until finally when I start reaching 14, 15 years old, and asking my mom, do I have to worship a God? Do I have to bow to God in a word? And, to paraphrase, she told me no. You can be who you want to be, you know. And that always meant the world to me. And I've loved my mom. Even without that, I love my mom. I'm a total mama's boy, but she has been an inspiration in my life. Um, and she's Christian. She loves God. She believes in Him. That whole thing gives her faith. I talked to her today, and I told her that there are people I worry. There are people that I love, that I care about, um, that were raised in the same manner I was. They went to church, they were taught the Bible, all this and that. Some of them swear by it, some of them live loosely by it. Um, I am, I'll admit, there are times I feel alone, I feel silenced, I feel like a bit of a black sheep because I have broken away from my upbringing. The moral value still stands, but you know, I can learn that without biblical teachings. I could learn that without being told about hell. I could have learned that without being told about an end of days, about all kinds of stuff. And it's funny, as you get older, this stuff becomes more clear. It really does. And from my experience, as you get older and you start to critically think about this stuff and you reflect back, you got to really kind of double down on your belief. You've got to really keep convincing yourself, or stay in a community and want to keep going back to church and keep feeding it. Keep people have people tell you from the outside, He is real. This is real. He is a part of us. We're going to heaven, all this and that. Why is that needed? Well, it's funny because a lot of us need the same thing for self-confidence. You know, a lot of us need to hear that from people, from loved ones, from friends. You can do it. You got this. And that's awesome. But how does church or religion differ from that? Like, how does believers and how does faith differ from feeding somebody self-confidence or giving them, a root for doing good? Well, self-confidence is there. Self-confidence is a natural thing. believing in something that instills fear and obedience by in my regard, and again just personal, that instills fear, obedience, and commanded fealty by an invisible character in an ancient book that has it's global and has three major factions, so many other sub factions, because people can't make up their mind who this god is, what this god wants, it's all written by people. It's all edited by people. That's what confuses the matter even further. But again, getting down to the seed, it's either you're going to lead this life and be good and you're going to get to your just rewards, or you're going to live this life the wrong way and you're eventually going to end up in perpetual darkness and suffer, you know. But now, somebody like me that sees the Bible as just a book, I don't laugh disrespectfully. I only say this because a lot of people, when you're religious and you try to explain to somebody that the book is the true book, that the Bible is a true Bible, it's what I swear by, that's fine. And people will say, I'm going to pray for you. People will say, I'm going to preach for you. I'm going to keep you, you know. That's great. I mean, I really respect that people, want to see good in my life. They want to see good things happen. But when people come at you from such a point of like, you need to believe that God is real. If not, I feel for you. And I will pray that you come to the light. That way you don't suffer eternally. From that standpoint, I get what they're trying to do. And they're going by what they've been taught from a book and what they were grown up on. But to me, as an agnostic atheist, I'm agnostic in the regard that I believe we're a part of something greater and that there's an energy to the universe, spiritual even. But I'm an atheist to any gods, any greater sentient life form or ghost or spirit. I, it's more plausible to me to have aliens that are more intelligent than us that could be affecting our lives than it is for me to have, again, some major spirit rolling over the whole universe. It doesn't click with me. Um, Again, it's at the equivalent of other things that people don't really see as real, and to me, it's a story that needs to be outgrown. But again, that's just me. People find faith, happiness, and strength of whatever they're going to. So as long as nobody's being hurt, it's really no big deal. But when people come at me in that regard and standing just Bible thumping left and right, I'm like, they got to understand that book you're swearing by, that book you're stamping down on, and I'm having to take an oath on, it's just a book, you know? It's just a book. But the major character in that book has obviously had an impact on your life. The stories have had a very positive impact on your life. They have helped you through strong times because words do that. Written word throughout all of man has been very powerful, either for good, for ill, or neutrality. All it is just a revelation of stories, of characters, a record of humanity, whether perceived or not, history books, so on and so forth. But at some point in our human development, we needed something to better understand the universe. We needed something to help us grow as a species, to better understand why things happen, or to at least take a guess as to why this and that's happening, or take inspiration from something that was seen and then grow it, either from money, either to control a small group of people, or other reasons, to inspire people, but it just went all awry at some point. But as with a human being, and as with society, we grow. Critical thinking grew, science grew, All of this based in actual evidence in the universe, on this planet, and in everyday lives. These results that could be repeated over and over and over, they led to truths, they led to facts, they led to providing more insight into the world and the universe that we are a part of. Things that could better our lives without having to blindly rely on and have faith in things that are unseen. I recently put up a post on Twitter. It's a it's a quote from an atheist named Matt Willoughby, something like that. And it said, "Faith is not the road to evidence, and faith is not the road to fact." Faith is a good thing. I put faith in humanity. It's probably ill-conceived, but I put faith in people. I don't know who they are. I don't know strangers on the street. I don't know. Hell, I even have friends that they'll surprise the hell out of you with something dark or unknown or good. But I have faith in those people, you know, because they're there in my life. They're there in front of me. I've at least had some experience with them. Um, and so it's the same thing like when it comes to a preacher. If they're dressed nice and they got a really good personality, you can look at that person and say, this is a person I could probably have, a little bit of faith in that he's probably going to lead me down the right road, and half the time they do and half the time they don't. Some of them are just con men and, leading people down another path for just their money, and some of them actually want to do good in people's lives and they believe in what they're preaching. Um, but the downside is, and this is eventually where this leads to, you get back to that seed of that truth, quote unquote, and the real truth. When you put that into somebody's life, especially as a kid, it can lead to lifelong anxiety. It can lead to constantly questioning yourself and a misinformed identity, just in my opinion. Because you can't really be who you are. And you're going to live in a constant fear of ending up in some place that you don't want to be. It could be argued that a lot of people have that anxiety of dying, and that's true. Especially if you're not religious. Because when you're religious, at least you have something to look forward to, or something you think you can look forward to. But if you're not, and you've only got this one life to live, you can't live in fear of death. So the point's kind of made that if you're religious and if you believe in an afterlife, ask yourself, does that take away from what you value in life? Does it take away your life value, your life worth, your worth as a person? Because you're dedicating your life, potentially, or at least a third of it, even a quarter maybe, the time of your life to something that is not seen. You have no guarantees that will be there when you die. There's no guarantees. There is no guarantees. And that is a common argument that is always fell upon. Well, I don't know for sure, but I have faith in this. And where does that faith come from? I will say, in my experience, it comes from things that people have seen and things that people have been told. And when they say they see something, there's usually a plausible explanation for it. But there's also things that they're told, especially as a kid. Especially as a kid. And the kid theme here is very relevant in my stories because of what I've been through. That's very true. I am a bit biased in that regard. I'm not going to lie. But religions don't stick around for thousands of years just because, you allow kids to make a choice. You don't tell them anything about religion. And then when they reach 18 or 19, like a minimum age to drink, you say, okay, you're 18 now. This is what I live. This is what I love. This is what I believe. There's these other religions over here. This is what they live. This is what they love. This is what they believe. Make your choice. Or if you don't want to make a choice, that's fine too. It's not really done that way, is it? I mean, kids are brought into church. They're raised this way. They're taught these things. And yeah, I mean, as you get older, you have a choice. You know, you're given a choice. And it's like, you know, I talk to my parents every so often, and I ask them these questions, and they didn't force it on me. And I'm not blaming them for this. Um, I do blame the people that do it forcibly. I do blame the people that beat kids or mentally torture them or berate them or cut them out of their lives or families that disregard somebody because they're not a part of that faith or because they're told by a god or by congregation members that you can't be here if this person and that person, because anybody that critically analyzes or anybody that critically thinks about anything having to do with faith or any kind of religion, depending on the congregation, you're cut out because you're automatically the devil because you actually think, you know, you're not allowed to question. You're not allowed to question. Or you're not a part of the top 1% in that church, you know? And that's the thing. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to start a church and make it seem viable, including being tax free here in the US. Go into that, I totally believe and endorse churches paying taxes because you've got these mega churches that are doing all this bullshit tax free, and you got Americans suffering when that tax money, when used appropriately and correctly, could actually benefit them. Don't even get me started on the social policy here in the U.S. We have a mixed economy. We have a capitalist economy mixed in with socialist policies. Social Security, firefighters, policemen, so on and so forth. You can Google that. But just imagine that for a second, though. I mean, imagine if our U.S. government, number one, correctly and effectively used taxpayer money to make American lives better than what they are now. And then imagine that these churches pay taxes and how much could be gained from it. I don't know a single person alive who doesn't think that these mega churches don't make a lot of money and that they're just doing it out of the goodness of their heart, you know. And a lot of people would argue, well, we need a bigger building for more people to come in out of the storm, so on and so forth. I get that. I get that. I mean, it goes back as far as the time of man evolving. I mean, you have temples. You have temples of worship, places of sanctuary. Totally understand that. But those temples, for the most part, historically, were an open sanctuary for people. There was no politics in it. There was hardly any money. In fact, it's even in the Bible where Jesus rebelled against the church and said, "This money, this temple is, not for money." He tore everything up and said, "You are not for the people," so on and so forth. That's it in a nutshell. I'm probably got some details wrong there, but it is what it is. In fact, there's a lot of arguments to be made that Jesus was socialist in some form. But the other irony is it's misconstrued in the Bible, or it's misconstrued by quotes saying that money is the root of all evil. Actually, the love of money is the root of all evil. And unfortunately, while money is necessary in our world today, there's a lot of religious leaders that don't mind greasing their palms, especially tax free. All the political stuff aside, I do believe that there is an argument to be made that if you raise your kid on a religious aspect, and there is a hint of not, if they don't live their life the right way, they will pay for it eternally. Or if they don't come to this deity in regards, if they're not bathed in certain water, if they don't drink certain wine or grape juice, if they don't eat certain bread, if they don't ask for forgiveness, they won't be able to see their family members in the afterlife. They won't be able to spend eternity with their family. They'll suffer. They'll suffer for a long time. I mentioned a discussion with my mother earlier, and I love my mother. She has her beliefs. She also knows my humor. And I mention my humor is because behind closed doors, I make a lot of jokes, a lot of stupid jokes, to be honest. I have a total dad humor. But there are times when I can go a bit far, you know. And honestly, I've made jokes the last few years um, that most of the time they're inappropriate when you really know me. If you're family and we're behind closed doors, um, I'm guilty. I'm human. But there are times I've made joking criticisms about religion and about God. And there's some discomfort in that, especially when I say that stuff around the mother, around the woman in my life that I do respect the most. And so there's a lot of things in life that weigh heavy when it comes to religion, when it comes to a person's source of strength, inspiration, source of hope. But what I told my mother today and what I see in other parts of my family, what I see around the world, is that when it comes to living a religious life, and when it comes to living in a fear of a God, or in the ramifications of it, if you go down that road and if you follow those teachings, when you get to the seed of all of it, it starts somewhere. And most of the time, it starts with a fear and a promise of do this, or you will be lost to darkness for all eternity. If you look at that for what it is, it's no different, in my opinion, than promising to kill somebody if they don't live the life that you think they should live. I know that's brutal. I know it's honestly it's probably not a things that people think about because they don't want to or because it's never really crossed their mind. But that's the way I've seen it and that's the way I regard it. It's fucked up in a lot of ways. Thankfully people are smart enough to realize and they don't I think people have faith in teachings, but I think a bit of a saving grace, again no pun intended, is that that's for an old song, old Christian song. Um, a lot of people just regard it as I just want to be a good person. I want to meet that standard of in this case like Jesus Christ. I want to be up there. I want to do that. And I know I can do it. And it keeps people trying. It keeps people hoping, and it helps people understand that they need to be a good person. And if you grew up on it, I mean that's what it is. But again, the dark side of it is my hair's standing up right now on my arm. The dark side of it is when you put that in a kid's life, it can cause problems later on. It can cause identity issues. Um, it can cause them to hold themselves back from what they could be, um, especially if they're told to recruit, so to speak, preach the gospel, you know, so on and so forth. I'm all for spreading a positive message, but unfortunately, preaching the gospel, um, again, tends to share that promise of light and dark. You're either going to burn or you're going through the pearly gates. And depending on the faction of religion you're in, those two things can vary. And of course, there's the more extreme measures in other religions, bombings, murder, inacceptance of people. People should be stoned, people should be killed. Don't get me started. For all the intense good intentions of religion, historically, I'm a bit of a layman on this, but historically it looks like it's caused nothing but suffering in the overall. Confusion, wars, toppling governments, killing people, lynching people, stringing people up, burning them alive, sacrificing them. But thankfully, with time, I'm of the opinion that we will outgrow this. Much like a child outgrows fairy tales, much like as we all do with spoilers, Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, Elvis. Not Elvis was real, but um, I think with time as a society we will outgrow this because older generations are older generations. And with the rise of the internet, with the rise of unbarricaded information, not as it used to be with newspapers, radios, TV, because all of those were focused entertainment. They were focused opinions and options and whatnot. They were filtered for the most part. They were filtered, and it was controlled information, and in such a regard that it was more focused, and you can only get so much, through an allotted schedule. But with the internet, wide open. It's a whole universe of knowledge. Some fake, some good, some real, some not. Some bad, especially. You've got dark shadow recruitment. You've got religious recruitment. But you've also got stuff like Wikipedia that does provide the actual truth about stuff. You've got groups of people that are coming together more often. They're finding people that relates to their ideas, to their beliefs, to their ideals, their understanding of where we are as a universe, who we are as people, who we want to be as a person, all kinds of stuff. And that's where all this leads. And eventually humanity is going to learn, whether it's in this generation or 200 generations from now. That is our evolutionary course, not just biologically, but societal evolution is real. Religion has evolved a lot over the years as well. That's one of the kickers because there has been so many edits made to the Bible, Bible for example, so many chapters removed by a congregation of men, very little women, by the way, of men editing this information that needs to go to newer generations. There's so many contradictions. That's the other thing. If there is an all-knowing, all-powerful being that wants this message delivered right to the source, no middleman, no middleman. Why would there be a middleman? Middlemen are always a bad idea. Always a bad idea. Medical insurance, for one. Again, political, but why wouldn't the truth be told directly? Now, there is an argument to be made that if God did too much, too many people would get what they want, it would throw it into chaos. If God does too little, then people suffer a lot more greatly than usual. But if you do it just right, there's that balance that can be attained. There is an argument for that. Now, granted, um, Futurama even touched on that in an episode. It was brilliant, actually. But with that said, going back to where it was, the seat of that truth, it only makes sense that the truth would be more clear. And I guess in a defense for it, the Ten Commandments from a Christian standpoint apply to that. They're basically the building blocks and the universal society truths that should be followed. But they didn't need to be represented by that example because those are the building blocks of any good society. But in the story, obviously those rules are given by a higher power. They're given to one man to deliver to millions of people, thousands of people actually, if I remember right. And it helped. I mean, in the story, it helped people. You know, I mean, the guy that was delivering the message came by and found society crumbling. They were worshiping other gods. It was golden effigies, all kinds of stuff. There was chaos, and these rules were handed down, saying, these are my commandments, follow them, so on and so forth. And that's the rule of law. You know, that's where society has developed with a rule of law. It's on us to govern ourselves, not without corruption, obviously, but it's on us to govern ourselves, and we've outgrown the use for um, supernatural guidance and interference in that regard. It's funny, it's actually kind of, I guess, kind of insulting in a way that humanity still, a majority of us still have to be, or somebody feels we have to be, still governed by 2,000-year-old dogma. And I'll tell you what, in a related thought, we're still dealing with a first century philosophy and dogma with 21st century warfare, world fucking wide. And if religion and bigotry and bias and racism are bedfellows in that regard, that's a nightmare scenario, and that's exactly how I put it on Twitter. It is a nightmare scenario. And I think part of the problem is that people are always looking for strings to get through the day, to keep bills paid, to keep the water on, the electricity on, to keep their car going, to have faith in something, because they have trouble finding it in themselves. And so when you're bogged down with bills, with trying to survive, with doing all this and that, do you even have time to look at the world around you? Do you have time to look at your neighborhood, your community, the people you're electing, the people you're going to church and listening to, you know, is leading your community, but instead is spreading fear, is saying, vote for this person, we go this way, we go that way. When you're day to day and you're overwhelmed, you're overcome by work, by family, by food, everything. Do you ever get time to really look at that? Or do you just go through it day to day? And that's kind of part of the problem too, isn't it? But, overall, I mean, if you're brought up and you're groomed in a certain way coming up as a kid, you don't know anything else. And that in lies the problem. Because as you get older and these seeds are planted, you're already used to that lifestyle, you know? That's your building blocks. And it is hard as hell to break away from that. And if you don't have the energy because you're too tired from working day to day and you're too tired from trying to make your life what you want it to be or what you think it should be, then you're obviously going to be too tired to reevaluate your life, see who you really want to be, and go from there. Because you were built on a religious foundation, and a lot of religions only have you to account for the person you're supposed to worship, not yourself. Point in case. I was recently at a service, a year or two back, where it was told to everybody there, and honestly, I wanted to get up. I wanted to shout and say, that's not true at all. What are you doing? But I didn't. And honestly, there's a part of me that kicks myself in the ass that I didn't. But for the greater good, to keep the status quo and to not start drama, which honestly, when you think about it, I kind of did myself dirty because I really believe I should have done it. But on Easter Sunday, the church I was at It was told to everybody in that congregation that you cannot change your life without God. You cannot do it without God. You can't do it yourself. You're not strong enough to do it yourself. You need that faith in God. He is the only one that can change your life. That hurt. I'm not gonna lie, that hurt. I won't go into more details than that. But when I saw this person and I heard this person saying that, I had to leave. I had to get out because I had to stop myself and I wanted to shout, and part of me was pissed off because I'm just like, these people can do it if they can find it in themselves, which they can with the right help. Thing is, this is one of the better churches. This is one of the most decent churches compared to everything else. Good people run it. They work their butt off. But without faith, without having to tell people that, they probably wouldn't be around. They probably wouldn't have a job. They probably wouldn't have a living. I mean, I'm pretty sure they would, but they dedicate themselves to people. They really do. That's what gets me. They dedicate themselves to their community. They dedicate themselves to helping people. But it's all done based off of stories. It's all done based off these different things, and it spreads. It perpetually spreads across the globe. And personally, that's where I felt alone. That's where I felt distant and silenced and unrecognized. Because a lot of the time, when you try to present these ideas and this criticalness of anybody of a religious base or in discussion, two things either happen. Number one, they either go back to, well, he works in mysterious ways. Or two, they say, well, there's another level. You've got to have faith in the stuff that's not there. You can't argue with that. There's no way. You can't, there's no debate to be had. And it drives me nuts because I'm the kind of person that, I mean, like, give me something here, give me something. Like, come, because you're coming at me with teaching from the Bible, but I regard the Bible as just a book with characters and stories, albeit moral stories, but there's also rape, there's pillaging, there's killing, there's murder, there's human sacrifice, there's, you know, incest, there's ownage of women, there's ownage of slaves, there's, um, this guy who's doing a lot of good in society, being killed off, being, sacrificed, and then rising 2 days later. Um, there's so many gaps in this book, but people swear by it, and they come at you with it, and it's just, you can't win. You can't win because, again, a lot of the times that there's a loop back, or people have their faith, and there's no real discussion to be had, you know, and they don't really want to hear your side of it, or they just kind of shut down. And don't get me wrong, there are times to when you can actually have a decent debate or a discussion with people, especially from like an agnostic atheist to, full blown hardcore Baptist or something like that. And they get fiery. They can get fiery so much to the point that it can get too hot and tempered, and you got to be like, okay, whoa, whoa, okay, we'll just stop here. You I can be the same way, especially if I'm dealing with a very difficult person and they're trying to come at me about my lack of faith and how I shouldn't be here and how you know, I'm not deemed worthy enough to do all this and that. That's happened, but um, that's what drives me nuts. Is that it's so hard to argue, or it's so hard to make a point, um, and for them to come to an understanding of who you are. because they can't see it. Like they either literally cannot see where you're coming from because they've been raised this way their whole life, or they've just recently discovered Jesus or God or Islam or whoever it may be, Jewish, Hindu. Um, and so you got a new mindset. You have a different mindset, or vice versa. Somebody very hardcore, um, you know, they can't see where you're coming from. You can't see where they're coming from because their belief is based on this that you find to just be a book, characters, scenarios, yada yada yada. It all gets confusing. It all gets lost in translation, um, and for varying purposes, which I've already gone over. People either want to hear it, don't want to hear it, they're scared to hear it, um, or they just don't see. Or the most popular argument for some hardcore fanatics, I don't listen to the words of Satan. That's Satan speaking. That's not critical thinking. That's not human thought. That's Satan speaking because that's what I've been told. That's what I've been preached at. Anybody that counters any argument I have that's not God is Satan. Is the ultimate evil. That's how it was told to me coming up, and that's what I stand by. You're not allowed to talk to me like that. Get out of my life because you're Satan. That's happened to me twice. It does happen. Rare, but it does happen. I've also, I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but earlier I mentioned about people cutting you from your life. That's happened. Um, they look at you different. People look at you different, especially people close to you. They do. They still love you. They still love you. That'll always be there. But when it comes to engagements, when it comes to events, when it comes to standard stuff, talking on the phone or whatnot, there's always something there, just in the background. And they're in their head to where they're thinking, what happened? You know, why did this person quote fall from faith unquote? Um, in my regard, it tends to be the drama that played out in my childhood, the trauma that I went through. Arguably, that was a trigger point as I got older because that helped me to realize that's not who I was. As I mentioned earlier, I was playing a survival role. In my own life, people look at that and they're just like, "Oh, that's why you fell." Because of that one experience with a very fanatical, very evil Christian. Something to do with it, but not the entire truth. The real truth is that I'm an intellectual, and that's not to say other people aren't. I put that label on myself is because I'm constantly, exhaustingly, always critical thinking, always analyzing, always questioning, always going over everything in my mind. That's, part of my mental makeup, I guess. And maybe my mental mindset, because I'm constantly analyzing, because I'm constantly questioning, thinking, lost in thought all the time, that is for all intents and purposes, the enemy of living a humbled and faithful life. Faithful, two words. A life full of faith, you know, because if you follow something in faith, you don't really question it. But if you do, there's either somebody there to pull you back, punish you to pull you back, or talk to you, even if it's yourself or if it's a community member. You're refed. You're like, oh hey, whoa, where are you going? Come back. Because they don't want you to stray. You don't want to stray. Because a lot of people, they're not going to know what to do. They've been so dedicated to a Christian life or a religious life that it's like entering a new world. If you start going into secular views, I mean, what do you do with that? Because it's all you've known. It's all you've known. And it's not easy. It's not easy to change how you came up, especially later in life, like mid 30s, for example, which, well, early 30s for me, but you're brought up in that way. So you've got this twisting mindset for good, for your own self. But the stuff you were taught as a kid, that framework, that ground you stood on, the pillars are still there, the morality's still there, but you're redoing the service, you're redoing the road you walk on, the walls that you put up. Everything. Everything except the pillars change. And that's not easy, man. I mean, that's one of the hardest fucking things you can do in life. That's why for me personally, this has been a struggle. And it's been hard for people to keep up. It's been very hard for people to understand where I'm coming from with this, especially when you mix in my childhood trauma, because they focus on that. They focus on that because it's very hard to see from their point of view. Much like with people if they walk a Christian lifestyle or religious lifestyle, whatever it may be. It's hard for you to see where they're coming from. You can only kind of stereotype in a way. You can only think, well, this person is just being led astray into a church for their money, or they're not really thinking this through, or so on and so forth. And so, I'm guilty. For a long time, I was guilty of that bias. I really was, and I see hints of it come out every so often. But I'm getting to the point now to where it's not the people to blame; it's the people in power, especially with these mega churches that keep feeding this. Um, I don't trust people that if they have a mega church and they're running it, I don't trust them. I'm more likely to trust a very humble pastor in a very local church, very commonplace church that's not trying to build a mega church. They're just trying to spread a message to good people and they're not with the in crowd. As long as they're decent people leading the church, cool with me. But these mega churches, I'll never trust them. Never, especially televangelists, because they're salesmen. They're selling faith. You'll never convince me otherwise. Those are stereotypes that I will live by and I'll never get rid of. Um, Admittingly, and I know that sounds horrible, but it is what it is. But on a more common level, after I had my trauma jump back on me at a later age, for 2 or 3 years after, I lived with a bias against two people, women and Christians. And this is coming from somebody that comes from a 90% Christian family. So you can imagine what that felt like, especially when the most important woman in my life was a woman and was Christian. This is how bad it was. Okay, I had moments, fleeting, but I had moments to where the hatred and the bias and the stomach churning pain that I got from all this started to infect the love for my mother. And I felt that again today when I was talking to her. That's probably not easy to understand, but it causes bias, it causes pain, it causes grief. And there's two levels to it because this was a loved one that did this to me, but it was also a person of faith. So it causes serious trust issues on multiple levels because that's not who I was as a kid, but it was forced on me. It was forced on me because I had to survive. I had to be a survivor. I had to do and I had to play along with what my abuser wanted so that they wouldn't hurt me or my sister. So I had to put on a mask. That's why I'm not a fan of masks. I've said it before here on the channel. I do everything raw. I don't wear masks. I'm open and honest with 99% except some personal details for security. And that's exactly why I'm making a near hour-long vlog right now. But my mother loves me, you know. And I told her this today. I apologized because we got into a discussion and we talked, and she talked to me about my jokes that I crack, you know. And she made mention that when she overhears it, it kind of hurts a little bit, you know. And so, out of respect, I'm obviously going to dial it back because, yeah, I after she talked to me, I took it. I didn't respond in the best way for two reasons. Number one, I did get a hint of like, why is she trying to silence me? You know, but that wasn't the case. The second part is, I was hurting my mom without knowing it. There had been some remarks made. She'd be like, "Hey, come on now," that kind of thing. But I had been hurting my mom. I had been hurting my mom because I was cracking jokes or criticizing, humorously, religion or God, as it were. And it's not horrible stuff. It's just it was critiquing things we'd watch on TV, or we'd be watching Law and Order SVU, and these crimes would be committed, so on and so forth. Obviously Hollywood on that, but there's a grain of truth in it, because the Law and Order stuff is inspired by true events. So most of it, obviously, very exaggerated, but you know, shit can happen. Um, but the bias and stereotyping and that is put on us by other people is very real, and it does impact our lives, especially with loved ones. It can affect it, and it's a two-way highway because while I've been biasing and stereotyping and had for all intents and purposes, a hatred for a while for Christianity and organized religion, um, because of what it did to me, because of what the person represented that did to me, and because of the pain and the divisiveness that I've seen throughout my family and friends and loved ones that has caused it, and the issues and all kinds of stuff. I rebelled, man. I was just done. I was just like, look, I don't want to deal with this. I can't. This is darkness. This is a plague. Yada yada yada. I went through that phase. I really did. But now, that was really more towards people that fed into it. But now, any criticism I have, any um, bias that I have towards it, is towards really more the fundamentals and the seeds in that is a part of it. And again, that stems back to the fear because a lot of people are living in fear because of it. That tends to be most of the time the root. And so that's where I'm at today. Throughout my whole journey, everything I've covered this video, I see the fear and the anxiety it can cause people, and the identity issues later on, and the non understanding of family and friends, and they the misunderstanding of why people are who they are, why they believe, what they believe, how they believe. It's human, you know. It really is human. And when you're human and you live a fearful life, or you're told growing up that you've got to live this way or you will be punished. It's it's a pretty dark thing in my opinion. And when you see it in billions worldwide, it's scary. Um, I quoted on Twitter general anxiety disorder. It's a fear of being disciplined, or just something bad will happen, so on and so forth. So again, I'm a layman on this stuff medically, but I've been diagnosed bipolar 2. I've been diagnosed with panic attacks. I'm currently getting looked at for ADHD, and I was obviously for a time diagnosed with PTSD because of my childhood trauma. It pops up every so often, but thankfully medication's helping. And I'm getting better at forecasting. I've been doing it for a few years now, and forecasting really helps. But that's with my childhood trauma. My childhood trauma only exacerbated what was there, what was being taught to me, which is a fear of not being able to be who I am. Because if I am that person and I try to think outside the box and question and analyze and don't lead the life that I'm told to live, they can't promise what'll happen to my soul, you know? And that's what's scary. Anyway, uh, here we are. I identify as an agnostic atheist. Some people may or may not get that. You also may wonder why, and I use this as a closing point. We have Hubble over here, and we have the web over here. If you don't know what these are the evolution of human understanding of the universe mechanically. We have the Hubble image right here, which is a shot of our universe. And you can see there are details, but they're kind of fuzzy, a little blurry. But you know that there's stuff out there, right? You see some mild definition, but there's not a whole lot of clarity. And then there's the web. The web's recent. We've made advances in our imaging technology in deep space to be able to understand better where we are in the cosmos. And it's also testament to what we can achieve with science, with unfettered understanding. Nothing limiting us except ourselves. And if you live a life of fear, even if you don't see it as fear and you see it or what's been told to you as how you should live, who you should be, but you can't break from it because if you do, then you'll be punished. That's a fettered life. There's blinders. There's blinders. And as things go along, as long as you evolve a bit as a human being and broaden your understanding, don't be closed minded, be accepting of other people. You'll go from this to clarification as to where you really are in the universe. Fuzzy to clarity. Weird analogy, but I love it because you can see greater detail here, not so much through things of the past, like outdated ideologies, philosophies, and first century dogma. We evolve. And this is just great examples of where we are, what we're a part of. This is what we're a part of. This is where we come from. This is real. I wish I could express that enough. I wish I tend to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. I was telling this to my mom earlier. I talked to my mom a lot about this stuff. I tend to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. And when I see the world the way it is, especially with where I'm at now in my life, when it comes to the matters of faith and religion, and I see the world being overwhelmed, it feeds some anxiety of mine because it's not, it just doesn't feel right. The world doesn't feel right. And that's a fairly common thing in life. But it's really deep, you know. It's really deep with me personally because I see where we could be. I see where we could go. But we've got these limitations that we've got to outgrow, that we've got to outpace and move beyond. But unless we stop giving these fears to our kids and to young people and to people that are down on themselves and down in life, and they're even unknowingly from people that think they're doing good, but they're it hurts to think that there are people out there, especially homeless people or people that have been locked up and they don't have any hope, but they're brought this message of, do you know this God? This God is very welcoming, very caring. He understands you. He's willing to give you a chance. But if you fail it, well, you know the rest. That's, just my thoughts on this stuff. And this is, again, coming from an agnostic atheist, um, left leaning independent politically. Just some truths about me and my evolution and my say on all these matters. I don't mean to offend anybody. I'm just a guy sharing my experiences with those that may feel alone in who they are. And I'm saying this because I come from a line of preachers. I come from a line of pastors, from a line of singers, from a line of evangelists. It's in my blood to want to spread a positive message and to let people know that they're not alone, especially with everything I've been through. I've been told that I should just let this stuff go, that I should just get it out of my mind. But that's hard as hell to do when you're brought up like I was and you were taught to reach out to people, have an impact on their life, use your words. Although, granted, it was really more for a religious aspect, but that stuck with me. My father wanted to spread a message. My father wanted to spread a positive message. There was a point in my mom's life where she wanted to do the same thing. She wanted to sing for God. She wanted to inspire people. She wanted to show love that the universe can give, obviously from a different point of view. And she still does. She still talks. She still is testimony. She will give testimony to the good that has come from her life, to the miracles in her kid's life, in her own life, in her family. And that's a part of me. That's a part of who I am and will always be. But for the sake of my loved ones and for the sake of whoever may potentially be hurt by this, I will be limiting my videos here on the channel when it comes to that input or opinions. But I did want to get this final video up, this final chunk of myself that from now on I'll be limiting. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I only say this is because as you get older, you do learn that there are, especially when you're a YouTuber, there are waves that you're sending out into the universe. And unfortunately, in my regard, this stuff tends to be pretty controversial. And I think it's sad. I really do. I think it's very sad that when it comes to politics or religion, it's so dogmatic that we don't talk about it. We can't talk about it without people getting heated, without fights getting started, somebody crying, somebody getting hurt. And it's because of that very reason we stay away from it. But at the same time, that is a very negative thing for these subjects. Because if it's not talked about, people don't understand where you're coming from. They don't understand who you are. They don't understand what you have to offer society. Or how you're not going to have an understanding of who they are, so you just continue to make assumptions or judge them without even knowing, you know, what they come from, what they've been through, how they view things, you know. You're just automatically going to assume and pass judgment. It's human. It's human. So that's one of the serious downsides if we don't talk about this stuff, and that's why I made this video. But at the same time, I'm gonna kind of provide a limit here and put it on myself. I'll be obviously still have Twitter, and I still have my playlist that I add to every so often, the bigger thoughts and theories. Um, and I've now got this out there. I've gotten my hour and 10 minutes worth of venting, explaining, giving you my opinion on where I think humanity is and hopefully where we will go, and also what we're capable of when it comes to clarity on our own understanding of the universe, of ourselves, of society, and how Star Trek should be our goal of understanding. And I say that because my adopted father has made a good point more than a few times about Star Trek and said, there's no religion, there are wars, but the Federation is a fantastic example of what humanity could become. It's an organization of understanding, of science, of exploring, of going where no man has gone before. And he's right. I mean, he's right. I mean, they're not without their darkness, that's for sure. But you know, it's good. But again, it's another one of those stories that can provide inspiration. There's been thousands of books, self-help, philosophy, teachings throughout humanity's time, and the Bible is only one of them. The Quran is only one of them. And I know I'll get comments about this, but honestly, it is what it is. Just keep it civil because I do vet the comments because I want to keep positivity on these. Part of being a YouTuber, you know? So, anyway, with that said, stay safe, stay sane. Remember, you're awesome. Never let the world tell you otherwise. And I'll see you in the future. Or hopefully, within 20 or 30 years of this video recording, maybe we'll make headway into something a lot more understanding about where we are, who we come from, and where we're at. We owe it to ourselves. I know I owe it to myself, and that's the journey I'm on. I'll see you next time. Peace.